So for more on this, let's bring in David Tafuri, a former Obama campaign foreign policy advisor and also a former State Department official as well. David, such a pleasure to have you here this morning. Let's start with this news regarding Russia, already banned from competing until next year because of their state-sponsored doping program. But now we're getting reports of a Russian figure skater, who's 15, by the way, testing positive for a banned substance. Your thoughts on this, and just how devastating is this for the games, given the fact that this figure skater likely was going to win the gold in this category?
As you mentioned, Russia is not allowed to formally have a Russian team, although the Olympics allowed Russian athletes to compete under the Russian Olympic Committee name. They've been banned for cheating and for doping, and now we have this figure skater who, by all accounts, was amazing, broke all sorts of records in terms of her scores, but apparently has a positive test for doping. It's very unfortunate, not clear at all if she even knew exactly what was going on, and she's very young, may not have known all of the rules, but her handlers are probably responsible for this if in fact she did test positive. Russia sees the Olympics as more than just a sporting competition. It wants to win as many medals as possible in order to have a ratification of its form of government, of its society. It's very nationalistic, and it believes that if it excels in the Olympics, it may project the image to the world that it wants to project, and that's why it cheats. And I believe it goes all the way to the top in Russia. It's Putin that sets this mood in Russia, and so it's no surprise that they've cheated again. They're very elaborate in their schemes, and it will call into question whether other Russian athletes have cheated as well. But everyone's heart should go out to this figure skater who's very talented, and hopefully this works out in a way that there is some disincentive for Russia to cheat in the future.
If in fact confirmed that they are cheating here again, given the fact that they're sort of already on probation already, what does the IOC then do then? Are there more sanctions that they then put on Russia as a result of this? Do they remove the Russian flag from competition even longer? What does the IOC even do here?
Well, there was a lot of criticism of the Olympic Committee for not completely banning Russian athletes. They made this compromise where Russia was not allowed to have a team, but Russian athletes were able to compete together under the same banner. And I think if there's widespread cheating again, the Olympic Committee is going to have to take further action, maybe ban all Russian athletes, which would really significantly impact Russia. But, the cheating is happening in a lot of different things. And Russia also cheated in the Paralympics, which I find amazing. You have disabled athletes who are up against lots of different obstacles on the other teams, and they're facing Russian Paralympic athletes who are cheating as well. So this is widespread in Russia, and the Olympic Committee, I think, is going to realize they have to do more to disincentivize future cheating.
David, this all obviously, Russia and everything also hovering about what's happening with China, the human rights abuses, the government, everything that's sort of a cloud that's above all of this. With freedom of speech also kind of hanging in the play here, and especially because we've had government agencies, government people like Nancy Pelosi tell athletes not to criticize the Chinese government because they're ruthless here. How do you sort of feel like athletes are sort of balancing all of this right now? Are you getting the impression that the athletes have been able to sort of tune out all this geopolitical noise and able to sort of focus on the games, or is this maybe having an impact on the games?
This is something I've been wondering about as well, because you haven't seen a lot of political statements from athletes. They may feel that the environment that China has created, which is very tightly managed with lots of Chinese propaganda, and makes them fearful to state any political views. But you have a lot of things going on in the background. You have Ukrainian athletes competing against Russian athletes while the two countries seem almost ready to go to war with each other. And you have China doing everything it can to hide the Uyghur genocide, which is happening. It used a Uyghur athlete of Uyghur ancestry in the opening ceremonies to kind of prop that athlete up there and make it look like they treat Uyghurs well. But meanwhile, there are more than 1 million Uyghurs in Western China who are in re-education camps, which are essentially like concentration camps, and they're doing everything they can to stamp out the Uyghur culture, and while propping up one athlete. So this is the background the athletes have to compete in. And I think the athletes have managed it very well. They've tried to stay away from politics, focus on the athletic competition. But I think maybe something might happen. And I think it's one of the things that we're all waiting and watching for, is to see what else China does if athletes do make political expression.
Yeah, on the topic of Russia and Ukraine, because I mean, I was watching with the figure skating yesterday. It was fascinating because you had, Ukrainian figure skaters, and I can only imagine what's going through their mind, worried about what's happening back home. This leads to the question of, nobody knows of what Vladimir Putin's planning to do with Ukraine. Some analysts don't believe at the end of the day he's going to invade that country. If he does invade the country during the Olympics, what do you think happens then? Does that completely then overshadow the games completely if he does that?
Well, he took another step forward that U.S. observers believe may indicate he does intend to invade, which is he's started new exercises, joint military exercises with Belarus, and he sent new naval ships into Crimea. So he's essentially now surrounded Ukraine on all three sides. Troops can come into Ukraine from Belarus. They could come in from the south in Crimea, and of course on the east, where there's already fighting between Russian-backed separatists and the Ukrainian military. So it seems like we may be headed to war. Hopefully this can be headed off through diplomacy, but I worry a lot for the athletes. I do, however, believe that Russia and Putin will hold off until the Olympics end, until the invasion, simply because they don't want to upset China, which is doing everything it can to have what it hopes will be the perfect Olympics, and to have a war begin during the Olympics would upstage China in a way that I don't think Putin wants to do.
Do you feel like media coverage has been sufficient when covering the Uyghur Muslim situation, the human rights abuses that China is having, all these other issues in terms of geopolitical conflicts that are happening in the region? Do you feel like the media coverage of the event has been sufficient so far of that?
I think Western media is trying to cover it, and which is noble, but I don't think it is getting enough attention. And I think some of the journalists who cover just sports maybe don't fully recognize the background to what's happening, for instance, with the Uyghurs. The overwhelming evidence there is that China is doing this to its Uyghur population and trying to stamp out that culture completely. They're doing the same to Tibetans in China as well, by the way, which gets very little coverage. So yes, I think Western journalists are doing their best, but we ought to be doing more, because these are very significant events that really transform the world over the next few years, and they're really kind of just a sideshow to the Olympics.
Absolutely. Great point. David Tafuri, former Obama campaign foreign policy advisor and former State